I am the director of Miami-Dade Animal Services. Just to point out, throughout my presentation and every single thing that we do at Animal Services, whether it's a flyer or brochure, we always use pictures of our shelter pets. And we have a whole group of volunteer professional photographers who come in and they do photo shoots. So we have a beautiful portfolio of animals, and I would encourage you to do the same. And we always keep the collars on them just to send a message, because the first thing you're going to see is, are these the cutest puppies you ever saw in your life? And then you're going to say, what is that collar? And so it really causes people to think twice when they look at these pictures. So there's a different different groups in the room. Some people are new to our field, so I want to start off with really simple explanation of open versus limited emission shelters, because as you can imagine, our decisions are based on the types of shelters that we're in, and then of course certainly our policies and our ordinances and different laws. But an open admission shelter can be public or private. In our area, we have the Humane Society of Broward County that is a private open admission shelter, and then the limited admission shelter, the no-kill or adoption guaranteed, are those shelters who don't take the animals if they don't have the room to adopt them out in a reasonable period of time. So those are always private. As a municipal or public shelter, we don't have the opportunity to limit the intake as one of those options like Dr. Hurley was talking about. But most importantly, I just implore you, in all of your relationships with other organizations and groups, regardless of their philosophies, I only have one rule, and that's you have to be operating legally for us to work with you. But other than that, I'm going to choose to respect your philosophy. I can promise you that I don't agree with all the philosophies with all the organizations that we work with, but that needs to be checked at the door, so that you can maximize the resources that you have in the community across your state with all these amazing groups like the ASPCA and Maddie's and HSUS. And really, let's focus on the mission, because there seems to be a lot of drama in animal welfare that takes away, and the laughter tells me you know exactly what I'm talking about, but it takes away from the mission of saving animals, and we're doing a disservice. So again, we don't have to agree with each other. We have to respect each other. And any of the other stuff needs to be outside the door when you come in to collaborate with another organization. So that's really the gist of the Asilomar Accords, right, is to play nice. And no matter how nasty or aggressive people might be with you, to not react the same, to use that opportunity to educate. And my trick is, I feel so sorry for that person that they have that negative opinion, and they're going to sit at home at night clenching their fists, being angry and hating animal services, for example, about something that's not true. So I always start a response thinking, oh, I feel so sorry for them. And it really helps a lot. That's just a little pearl for you. But in any event, there is no umbrella organization in animal welfare in the United States, which I think is a very bad thing. I think that there needs to be accountability for shelters. I'm so thankful that we have the Association of Shelter Veterinarians, and if you're not a member, please log on at sheltervet.org today and join. It's very inexpensive, and you just have access to a wealth of information. You've heard a lot about the standards of care, and I'm really looking forward to having some sort of standard for shelters, seeing that we don't have this umbrella organization to really make shelters accountable for how they operate. There's a great listserv. If you have questions, you just post a question, and you'll have answers from experts all around the country. So my background is, after veterinary school, I was a clinic aide actually at the Animal Medical Center. This was after college, and I got a wealth of really great experience at the Animal Medical Center. There were 65,000 cases a year. at the time about 75 veterinarians. So I learned so much about the field, about medicine, and then I went to veterinary school and went back to the Animal Medical Center to do my internship. From there, and I realized, and it was pretty obvious, now looking back, it's pretty obvious, that I became a veterinarian for this population of animals, for the homeless animals, because honestly, when you have an owner attached to an animal, I don't really have to worry about them because they have somebody who cares about them. But what about the rest of them that people pretty much turn their back on? And still a mystery to me how in this country we can spend billions of dollars on cute little collars with diamonds for dogs and Gucci bags as carriers, but yet we're allowing homeless animals to be euthanized by the millions. So that's still a mystery to me. But in any event, at the Animal Medical Center, I realized I quickly became part of the underground adoption arena, and somebody would abandon their animal, and then a group of us would just work really hard to try to get that one a new home. And I kind of naturally fell into North Shore Animal League, which again is interesting in retrospect. Have any of you worked at North Shore Animal League? I now know that North Shore Animal League is the most unrealistic shelter in the entire country. And that's because at the time I was there, they had a $50 million annual budget. Because Mr. Lewitt in the 50s was Midas, and everything he touched turned to gold. And he became an incredibly wealthy man. He said, oh, Publishers Clearinghouse, this looks like a good idea. And today, if you buy a magazine through Publishers Clearinghouse, some of that money goes to North Shore Animal League. So at the time, there were about 45,000 animals handled and adopted, and the hospital was set up solely for shelter animals. There was 24-hour care, an internist, a surgical specialist. There were wards, one for parvovirus, one for distemper, one for upper respiratory infections, and one for skin. And then you would find yourself as a veterinarian putting an animal up for adoption with a release note like this. This dog has disseminated mast cell cancer, and he's going to die within the next 6 months. If you agree to adopt him, we will treat his mast cell cancer for free for the rest of his life, even if he lives longer than 6 months. And you would write these releases for these animals. Maybe it was diabetes. It didn't matter. They would come back to North Shore for free for life for that problem. And so that, as you can imagine, became my reality, and that's how I just figured it was in shelters. Which leads me to the rude awakening of taking the job at the Humane Society of Broward County. And I tell you this story to make you think about what I just told you about limited and open admission shelters. I got to the Humane Society of Broward County where they told me they don't euthanize for space. And I took the job, and very quickly, a cat was going to be euthanized for a URI. And call 911. I thought I was having a heart attack. Euthanizing for a URI when all it takes is a week in the hospital with intravenous fluids and a feeding tube and, a little viral arthropathy never kills anybody. We'll give them Torb and they'll be fine. Are you nuts? And it was such a rude awakening, and I tell you that story because look at my education. Look where I was for many years. And it wasn't until the Humane Society of Broward County that I really had any idea that the overpopulation problem, or the not all shelters have the resources like North Shore Animal League. So it was really, I keep that message in my head when I talk to people, and I learn that even in my community in Dade County today, that there are veterinarians that I still meet who have lived in Dade County for 20 or 30 years and have no idea how many animals are handled at my shelter. So something that I'm going to talk about later on. So I was at the Humane Society of Broward County, and I knew, being one county away, that there were serious issues at Miami-Dade. And And one of the ways that I knew was at the time, Animal Planet was filming a show at Miami-Dade Animal Services, and they called me and said, we were told to call you if we want a happy ending, because we're filming, and every time we go to follow up with an animal 2 days later, they're missing. And so I said, sure, I'll help you. And I learned a little bit about animal services. So Animal Services had previously been under a myriad of other departments, and unfortunately we find this to be the case with animal services or animal controls in our country. And when you look at New York City, and this department is under the Department of Sanitation, what message does that send about what we think about homeless animals? And most recently, up to 2005, the police department were running animal services. And I said, well, you know, I really think that I could be the one. I really think I'm the one to make a difference there. And I was asked the other day by Ed Sayers from the ASPCA why I took the job, and later it was explained to me his question was actually, were you nuts? Like, what were you thinking? Not like, oh, like, did you just want to move to warmer from Fort Lauderdale to Miami? So in the summer of 2005, there were 28,000 animals left at the shelter. There were 3,000 adoptions a year. These are annual statistics, and RTOs and rescues. So a total of 6,800 animals saved. And I'm just going to give you we're going to go to the end of the book, and I'm going to tell you what happened in between. But this past year, we handled 36,000 animals. Unfortunately, we can't blame the economy for our increase in intake, right? Because everybody now says, oh, the intake is up because of the economy. The economy is really great. You know, from 2005 to now, in the beginning, I can tell you, because I bought my house at the height of the market, and our intake just continued to climb year after year. And adoptions, this year we did 8,334 adoptions. We sent over 4,000 animals to rescue. And unfortunately, RTOs I'm going to talk about were only about 1,500, a huge challenge for us that we're still trying to figure out. And overall, we saved 14,000 animals this year. So I'm going to now tell you what happened in between. But to back up, in 2004, the county manager had said, you know, I'm getting all these complaints about animal services, so I want to know the truth, and I'm a county manager, but I don't have this expertise. So I'm going to ask the Humane Society of the United States to come in and do an evaluation. And they did that. Oops, sorry about that. They did that, and good and bad, 578 recommendations, right? Because I had to respond to every single one of them. There was a 200-page scathing report that I later told the county manager was a compliment compared to what was happening at the shelter. It was the tip of the iceberg. But the number one thing that they recommended was to hire an experienced director. So I know Kim is here. I always thank HSUS for my job, because if they didn't come in and do the evaluation, I wouldn't have gotten a job. But there were all kinds of really disturbing things that were found. And this picture is the outside of the adoption runs. This was just meant to be a tarp. But how old was it? Many, many years. This was just weathered. I think that was my first thing. I got up on a ladder and cut it with a machete. I was a crazy woman, as you can imagine. And then these are old monkey cages that they used for whatever kind of animals. But unfortunately, these are actually holes. And so they would put a mom with neonatal puppies who would proceed then to roll out onto the floor. So there were just all kinds of really depressing things. And I think this slide, I wish I could tell you that I set this up for this lecture. But this is one of the things. I did rounds every day. I might show up at 10 at night. I might show up at 6 in the morning. The word on the street was you never know where she's going to show up next, because I'd be nobody could see me. And I'd be like, good morning, how are you guys? They would start shaking. I wish I could tell you this was a joke, but this is one of the things I found. And if I had a title on this slide, it would say, this is the definition of apathy. This is the quality of animal care. There were no other animals in that cage. There wasn't an adult in that cage. So there were a little over 100 employees, and there were 2 unions. There still are 2 unions. And one of my messages is people are very intimidated by unions or kind of think like, oh, it's the union, my hands are tied. And I'm here to tell you that if you practice good management skills, then your hands certainly are not tied. You need to know only one thing. You need to know what the bargaining agreement says. For example, if I change your schedule, I have to give you 2 weeks' notice. So make sure you give 2 weeks' notice. So just follow the rules and make sure you're educating your staff. Make sure you have standard operating procedures. Make sure you're fair and consistent with all the staff and all the discipline. And guess what? A union is really irrelevant because you didn't give them a reason to complain. And so we've been very successful dealing with the unions. 105 employees at the time. In my opinion, it was nearly 100% in that category of apathetic staff. And we actually sat down and tried to figure out how to fire everybody. Let's, close the department. Close the department for 5 minutes and make new job descriptions and figure out how we can do that. Because there were thousands of animals missing a year. When I first started, I asked for the statistics. I was given a piece of paper. But because I got a little hint that maybe I shouldn't trust everybody, I took out my calculator. And there were 2,764 animals in that year that were unaccounted for. And will never be accounted for. And I believe that the staff was stealing them. So there were just, you can read the other issues. I mean, no laundry detergent. I remember walking into the room where the washer and dryer was because it might be 11 o'clock at night. I'm doing the laundry. And I looked at the kennel supervisor and I said, where's the laundry detergent? And what you just should never say to me is ask the question, laundry detergent? They had never used laundry detergent. They stood in the run. So everything you heard Dr. Crawford and Dr. Hurley say not to do, that's what was being done. Hosing the kennels in a run while the dogs were still in the run with no disinfectant. Maybe sometimes you had disinfectant, but if you ran out, nobody filled it like it was just water. And then that first year was also a joy because we had 3 hurricanes, and we actually had to close. We lost power several times. And one morning I said, okay, we have all the staff here. Let's just feed the animals, give them a big meal now since we're going to just have a skeleton crew. And they said, well, we can't do that. And I said, why can we not feed all the animals now? And they said, because there aren't enough bowls in the shelter to do that. So again, like a crazy person, I had to go to Publix and buy paper plates so that we could feed everybody. But just my message again is that there are so many issues in so many shelters. I'm not sure that we could have had any more issues than we did. And you'll learn a little bit more about that. Nobody had really cared about the building. So I systematically began to throw out things and realized very quickly that it had been a very long time that anybody had, or actually I would actually say nobody really had cared about the building. I found microscope slides from 1974 in the pharmacy. I found invoices that were 10 years old. I found autoclaves that had come back from servicing years before. But I also was given a request to purchase a new autoclave because nobody knew that autoclave that came back a couple of years ago was indeed fixed. So This was another, I think I ripped these off ripped these off the wall by myself, but this is a picture of 6 feeding troughs. And this was the bottom of the trough, and what you can't appreciate in the picture is that these are metal, this is all rusted out, so the metal is sticking up with jagged edges. This is after they were ripped off the walls. This part was adoptions, and then on this side was ill. It could have been skin, it could have been respiratory, it was anything. And then along the wall here, between the kennels, there was just some old plywood that was rotting. And in one of those runs that was maybe 12 by 3, there would be 6 to 8 large dogs in those runs. So obviously a high infectious disease rate. So I needed a lot of help, and I wasn't shy about asking for it. I actually had undercover detectives in the kennel, which is a beautiful thing if you can ever swing that, and you need to it was great because I knew this guy was not cleaning cages, and I took a little piece of paper and I said to the supervisor, put this under the cage, the newspaper. After he says he's finished cleaning, I want you to look under the newspaper. And that supervisor, because I didn't tell anybody that, even the supervisors didn't know what I was doing. And he came into my office white as a ghost, like, how did you know that? Because he hadn't been cleaning. So that was very helpful to find out sort of who the bad apples were and who the employees were that really maybe had potential, but were too afraid to come forward because there were so many staff that were not doing the right thing, choosing not to do the right thing, that they were afraid. So the first thing is to just think globally. I was blessed in that I had a 30% vacancy rate when I started. So I had over 30 positions vacant. And you might say, oh, that's horrible because you're so short-staffed. But it's much easier to hire somebody than to work plan somebody out of the county. And if you are from a municipal shelter, you know that bad employees, and I hate to say this, and I hope it's not true in your county, but in my county, bad employees are protected by the county, who is afraid maybe of a litigation, and protected by the union. So if this was my business, or if this was a humane society or a private organization, this landscape would have looked much better, or much different, certainly at the time and by now. But I chose to look at those vacancies, don't forget I wanted 100% vacancies. So I said to my assistant, was able to bring in my management team. I hired an assistant director and I said, we will do every interview. And he was from the county, longtime county employee, and he said, Sarah, directors don't do that. It's simply below them. And I said, well, this director will, and you're going to be sitting right next to me. And we did, to date, I've done over 400 interviews, and I still interview everyone, from the janitor to the assistant director. Admittedly, I'm a control freak, but also that's my responsibility. I'm responsible for changing this culture, so I want to sit there and handpick every single one that I choose to bring on my new team. And I wish I could stand here today and tell you that I am the best and I interview and hire the perfect people, but I've concluded that I can just pull a name out of the hat and I would probably be just as successful. I still haven't figured out to hire perfectly, but the easiest thing is that they're on probation, so if they didn't work out, then it's much easier to get rid of them. But standard operating procedures that are complete, we had shared, I've become kind of notorious in the county, and other departments actually come to me and I train their management teams on how to do progressive discipline. And the first thing I always start, well, where's your standard operating procedures? And a lot of times they don't have them, but when they look at our standard operating procedures, they say, this is SOPs for dummies. And I said, exactly. Because you don't want to give anybody the opportunity to say, I didn't know, it wasn't there, we didn't know we had to do that. So you want to make them very simple and very complete. But most importantly, you have to have supervisors who are also going to be effective. And as I speak today, please know that as much as I wish, and when I started I said this is definitely a 5-year plan, and now at 5.5 years I'm changing it because it really is a 10-year plan, because we're not perfect and there's so many challenges, and I still struggle with middle management. But I hope that you take some pearls and some different things that have worked for us and use them in your shelter. But holding staff accountable is really going to be the key to your success. And early on, again, I would be in my office with only a conference room separating the lobby and my office, and I would hear people screaming and every day, all day. And I would run out there, and the rebuttal from the staff was, well, he wanted to adopt this dog, and it got euthanized, and he was mad. And so he yelled at me. So the rebuttal from the employees, so I yelled at him. And so my point is to not, you're not allowed, let's just start here, you're not allowed to yell at people. And every point of contact has to be positive. So how are we going to make that happen? And this is just a crazy idea. But let's try not to give them a reason to complain. I know it's crazy, and I know it's really new to everybody, but every point of contact has to be positive. And that's because we all know that we can't do it alone. If we could do it alone, we wouldn't need to be here, right? Because we'd all be out of business, because we all did everything perfectly, because there wasn't an overpopulation problem. So that tells you that collaboration and working together is going to be the only way that we can solve the overpopulation crisis. So initially, the Chapter 5 is our county code that we have to abide by. And there were a lot of things in there that didn't make sense. So I would encourage you all, whether or not you're private or public, to look at your ordinance and say, what does make sense and what doesn't, and how can we make it better for the shelter animals? There was a mandatory 5-day stray hold for dogs and puppies. And one thing that did not make sense is we do dog licensing. So if you never licensed your dog before and we, found you, you would get a warning. No less, you would get a warning on a piece of paper that never went into the computer system. So if you never licensed your dog, then you just never licensed your dog, and you were never held accountable for that. But if you were in our system and you always licensed and vaccinated your dog on time, but one time you were late, you're going to get a citation. So what kind of message does that send to people? I'm going to try not to get in that computer. I don't want animal services to have my information. So that was one of the things we changed. We actually took us about 1.5 years. We rewrote the entire chapter, and then about 6 months later, we were able to pass an anti-tethering law as well. So this is back at the time in 2005, the policy was a 10-day stray hold for dogs and puppies. And I don't know if the person that asked the question about changing that stray hold is still here, but Kate sort of alluded to this. It was a policy that it was 10 days, but I didn't have to do that because the ordinance was 5 days. But again, what did I tell you about the number of dogs in a run? 6 to 8. So we're already set up for failure, right? So what I did was I looked at the RTOs and the numbers of people. Okay, let's start with RTOs, right? Less than 1% return to owner. It's horrible, and it's still horrible. But let's just talk about that. That's less than 1%. So are you going to sacrifice the rest of your 30,000 plus population for less than 1%? Unfortunately, when you're dealing with the numbers that we're dealing with, I always tell people, here are my choices. This one's horrible and this one's terrible. Those are my choices. So I want everybody to come find their dogs, but in fact, it was very rare that anybody came to pick up their pets, dogs in particular, anytime after day 3. So I just had to convince the county manager of this, and that was the best thing that could have happened. But the answer to that question is, you have to have that data to go from whatever your stray hold is. If you want to reduce it, you need to look at that number. And I'll guarantee you within that first day or two, your RTOs are the highest they're ever going to be. And that's the information that you need to convince whoever you need to convince that your stray hold needs to be lower. And this is, for an open immersion shelter, probably the most significant thing. And you've heard this all day yesterday and all day today. Look at the difference between 10 days and 5 days, and the difference with that population, keeping them healthy, not overcrowding them. That makes the world of difference. So super important. There was not a hold, and there still isn't a hold for cats or owner surrenders. So once they come into the shelter, we can adopt them, send them to a rescue partner, or euthanize them if they need to be euthanized. So the one thing that we did change in the ordinance was puppies under 6 months are held only 24 hours. And we did that for several reasons. Again, you would really find it difficult to convince me that that litter of 8 puppies that are 6 weeks of age were like all walking down the street as strays, right? Like, we know that's not true, number one. Number two, what we all know is puppies are our most adoptable type. So now I'm going to hold them 5 days and really increase the exposure to germs, really increase the likelihood that they're going to get sick when I know I can adopt them out so quickly. The only exception is going to be if they have identification. Obviously, we're going to hold them, but it's very, very rare that the puppies do. And then the cats as well, we do hold them longer if they have identification. What we're doing now with owner surrenders, which I'm sure is a challenge to all of you as well, is somebody surrenders, Sara Pizano surrenders this dog, but the microchip is registered to someone else. So we do contact that person because in Dade, in our state, we don't have very specific or very good definitions of an owner. So for our county, it's if the dog is licensed, that's the owner. But if you think about it, it's a little bit crazy, right? If I had my dog for 3 years, I lost my dog a month ago, somebody finds my dog and licensed my dog, then, and maybe I didn't, that was my problem, but it kind of doesn't make sense. So there are some struggles with that still. In Dade County, we have about 500,000 dogs in our county, and unfortunately, well, you can look at it two ways. It's unfortunate that we only license about 40% or 200,000 of those dogs. But the good news is I have a gold mine that I just have to figure out how to tap into. And I'm not talking about, people always throw at me, I'm sure if you're especially in management, people have 1,000,001 things that they think you should be doing. You should do this, and you should do this, and you should do that program, and you should have mandatory spay-neuter because you can make money. Well, no, because that costs a lot of money to enforce, and we don't have enough of those donor-subsidized programs by far in our community. But I already have an ordinance. People just aren't compliant. So that's the gap that I need to fill. And we are actually, I just learned, those of you in municipal shelters, I just learned about an electronic routing system that we implemented a couple weeks ago for our animal control officers. It's called ARC Logistics. And it gives you electronically the most efficient routes for your animal control officers. And we're finding that, look at that, they do have some free time. So in that free time, you better believe they're going to be, I don't care if they knock on doors, I'm going to be looking at where my high intakes are of my stray dogs, and when we're going to schedule them to go do sweeps in that area and knock on doors and check addresses and sit there. We have a code enforcement technology fund in our county, and we've gotten over $100,000 in grants to purchase for a lot of different things, but one is we bought those laptops for our field officers. So whereas before, they pick up a dog with a license tag and they would have to call dispatch. Well, what if they were on the phone? They end up bringing that dog in. Now they just sit in the car, they look up the tag, they drive 1 block, and they return the dog in the field, which is what I ultimately really want. But this is an amazing opportunity for us. So that's why I said it's good and it's bad. I mean, it's good because we have this amazing potential, and then we could solve our problem in Dade County, certainly, with those we could afford to have all these donor subsidized programs that we need. But in terms of solving the shelter issues, it's really a very basic management 101. And that just means that you need to be educating your staff, and don't take offense to this, but when you think about it, employees, pets, and children, they need to know what to do, right? They need guidance. They need to be taught. They need to have encouragement. They need to be trained. Some more than others. But it's that consistency and being fair and equitable to everybody that's what's going to get you to where you need to go. And most of the management issues that people present to me and they want my advice, there's a lot of emotion in there. And, it's not about emotion. You need to just get down to the basics, make sure you're fair, and make sure that you're educating your staff to the best of your ability. And so far, I've talked a lot about terminating people and writing people up. But really, truly what I want my staff to shine. Because I know that if my staff are happy, they're going to like their jobs, they're going to do a better job, they're going to want to excel, and all of that is going to have a positive effect on my animals. So yes, it's for selfish reasons, but ultimately we're all here because we know that our homeless animals deserve better. And the only way that's going to happen is if our staff is part of that mission. So we have enlisted as much as the community as we possibly can because, again, this is an initiative that needs to happen in the community, right? All of us are sitting here as the reservoirs, as the ones who are trying to make a difference, and we're all scrambling and we're all trying to figure out how to adopt our way out of this problem, when in fact, the only way that we're all going to succeed is by having these donor-subsidized programs that are targeted to those low-income areas or those free-roaming cats, because we know that the lower the socioeconomic status of a person, the more likely that pet associated with them will end up in a shelter. So I used to be of the mindset that, our doors are open, we're going to do as many spay neuters for the public as we can. And now I've realized that we do need to target more. We have very limited, and I think I didn't even include this in here, but in the last year and a half, we've done about 4,000, a little over 4,000 cat spays and neuters with no impact to our operational budget. So when everybody's talking about budget cuts, you have to be very mindful and creative about how you're going to overcome that. So what we did was we said, well, I met with the Veterinary Association and I need them to be on board, and what could we do to really, put a dent in this? And I want to host a volunteer spay-neuter day, similar to Operation Catnip. Unfortunately, it's not quite as big as Dr. Levy's program, but we have been able to do 4 or 5 of those events with volunteer veterinarians, anywhere between 25 and 30 veterinarians. Dr. Crawford and Dr. Levy came to our very first one, and we had commissioners sponsor it. Some of them I sponsored with trust fund donations to our Animal Services Trust Fund. But we had targeted just free roaming and feral cats, and everybody gets ear tips. So we've done about 900 of those, and then the balance were done on our mobile unit that I do keep parked in our parking lot just to cut costs because I don't have to then pay a driver. And 2 years ago, we received Maddie's fund as part of our community starter grant with the Humane Society. So we were able to do cat spays and neuters for that first year. And then this year, we received the Florida Animal Friends grant, and we continued our once-a-week program for cats. We also arranged for a private donor to support a program for another foundation that had a mobile unit, and they did that in our parking lot as well. And we're continuing that program for dog spays and neuters for $25, and that we're using our trust fund money. So there were many different sources. If you heard what I mean, there's many different ways that we raised money or, were able to apply for money for those programs. And $4,000 is great, and we're very proud of that. But you know what? How many need to be done in our community? 100,000. So we have a long way to go, and we know volunteers is one way that's going to make that a reality. We started the volunteer program in early 2006 because there were so many issues at Animal Services before I started. Instead of actually dealing with the issues, the administration at the time said, no volunteers, that's it, you're all kicked out. So that's the way that they dealt with it, unfortunately. So we started the volunteer program, and what's super, super important is, regardless of what your policies are, these are your ambassadors. So you need to educate them. You need to make sure they're spitting out exactly what you told them, because there's so many misconceptions. And the internet, I always call it a blessing and a curse, because things get misinterpreted and there's a lot of misinformation around. So you want to make sure that your volunteers get the information that they need. So what we do is we have a volunteer orientation. We do them twice a week, and the dates and times are on our website so that we don't have to go back and forth with people. We do have to have them do a background check and pay for it. And the reason that I don't pay for it is because once people come to orientation, we have a very low attrition rate. So we have a lot of people come to orientation, maybe 20, and maybe ultimately 3 or 4 end up as long-term volunteers. So I don't want to, that's not a place I want to invest in, because if I was guaranteed, if we had 100% compliance and everybody stayed and volunteered, I wouldn't have a problem finding the money for that. But that's why we do make them pay for a background check, and it is a good idea because I'm sure all of you do background checks on your employees, so it's really not fair to do a background check on your employees and not on the volunteers. So this is an area, so we've done really good with that part. But this next step is an area where we're still struggling. And hopefully you all are set up differently or have other resources that you can use. But we have a very large shelter, 100 to 250 animals a day, not enough staff to care for them. So you can imagine everybody's running around like a chicken without a head, and we really need to train the volunteers. So we've tried to match volunteers with a staff person that we feel comfortable with with respect to training, or we may put them with an experienced volunteer. So this is an area that we really need to improve in terms of training. So we're looking at all different kinds of things. And we also make them sign an agreement that they understand our policies and procedures, that they are welcome to ask us questions, but just like the Asilomar Accords, they need to be respectful of those decisions. And that's not to say if they see an issue, we encourage them and we want them to go to a supervisor. If there's an issue with the staff person, there's something that needs to change, an animal wasn't taken care of when it should have been taken care of, we want to know that. So the volunteers are part of this whole package, and the whole reason why Animal Services got better. We also have them wear uniforms, so it says volunteer on the back, and they're very easily identified for the public. We do give them the t-shirts, and that's after they pass the background check, and then they have to wear tan pants. They can wear shorts or sneakers, but we have a dress code for our staff, and we want to dress for success, and we want our volunteers to dress for success. So again, every point of contact, Every message we send, we want it to be positive. We want it to be consistent. And if we had staff and volunteers with, ripped and dirty clothes and everybody looked different, you couldn't identify anybody, that also sends a message, right? It sends a message like SOPs. And one area that we really struggle with is, our staff, and I'll give you an example of a very an irreconcilable problem that we have. Many years ago, the previous administration was asked, how many phone calls do you believe you get every year? And they said, like 10 or 20,000 a year. And then the county implemented 311, which is a central call station for any county questions that people might have. It's animal services, garbage pickup, tax appraisers, whatever, it doesn't matter. And they have a knowledge base. They have a couple computers in front of them, and they put in the keywords, and they get the answers so that they're giving a consistent message. So this year, 311 handled over 150,000 phone calls for us. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is, at our shelter, we also have direct lines, and another 150,000 phone calls come to our shelter with one operator. So you don't need a calculator to figure out that many of those phone calls are abandoned and many people can't get through. So we're constantly saying, what do staff have to do, and what can volunteers do? The learning curve for my operators is months. Right? I mean, we're a huge department. We do enforcement. We do sheltering. There's so much information. So that's really not appropriate for a volunteer, but how can I take somebody off the floor? Now I have an extra volunteer in kennels. Maybe I can take the person and put them in the operator suite to help answer phone calls. Another mistake that I made early on is scheduling. I started off with good intentions, and I said to our volunteer coordinator, the volunteers have to have a schedule. And then, as time went on, we kind of weren't strict about it. So now we don't have volunteers with a schedule. And that's a big challenge that we're working on to change. But I would encourage you that if you're starting a volunteer program or you have a volunteer program, that's the way, right? It's going to make you the most efficient, because you can then utilize your staff the most efficiently if you know who to expect and who's coming in to volunteer. So the other thing that I think is really important is to create the jobs you need, which sounds kind of crazy, but we've had people come in to volunteer and they want to just play with the dogs or pet the dogs or pet the cats. And I said, well, yes, we do have a position, and all you have to do is put them in the bathtub and you can pet them while you're bathing them. That's the pet position. Because I'm in Miami. You know how many fleas and ticks we get per day? Probably 7 million. So, yes, I would love if we had enough volunteers for everybody to have, a regular, Julie and Michaels or whatever her name is, to train the dogs and, to have all that. But I'm talking desperation here. I'm talking, what is our most important thing? And the most important thing is to get those hundreds of ticks off that dog, right? So they can be more adoptable, or get that urine smell off the dog. So you want to create programs that really are the most important. And as you build your volunteer program, as it matures, there can be other things that happen. But start with those things that you really need. Another culture shock, another piece of culture shock that happened to me, when I was at the Humane Society of Broward County, one county north of Dade County, we had a volunteer position called the greeter. There was a little kiosk like this. There was a chair, and that was the coveted position. And for seniors, there was a coveted schedule. And, the most senior greeter got the most senior schedule. I mean, it was a big deal. They competed over this position and over this, the time slot. So I said, wow, we really need a greeter at Animal Services. So I set up a desk, and I even got a computer and a chair, and I made an SOP book. And in 5.5 years, I've had a greeter for 2 hours. So when I say it's a different country in Dade County, I mean it's completely different. So again, as I'm telling you things, you're going to hear things and say, oh, we tried that, and that like did not work in my shelter, and that worked great in mine, and vice versa. There's going to be things that are just different about your shelter or about your population, or who knows. This is Melissa, and Melissa is just graduated from college, and she happens to have, which was very beneficial for us, she happens to have a photographic memory. And Melissa would be in downtown Miami and see a flyer for a lost dog. And then 2 weeks later, she would be in the shelter, and she would say, hey, I saw your flyer. And she would match dogs like that, and cats. And then she started going on Craigslist, and people who didn't even know about animal services or maybe to look there for their lost pets, they didn't know about our website. We use Chameleon. We're on Pet Harbor. The pictures are uploaded every hour. They're updated. So she started our Pet Detectives Club, and it's for those people that you don't even have to come to the shelter. You come to the shelter for orientation. You never have to come to the shelter again after your tour. You can sit home and work virtually from home and help our lost and found department of exactly one person, 1.5, one person per day. And they've helped match so many pets. And again, another thing that we need to promote, we've been highlighted, nationally with this program, but it's actually not a highly desirable part of our volunteer program. So we're looking at other ways to get people really interested in that. But if you guys aren't doing something like that, I love the idea, and I thought it was, I still have to figure out how to help it take off, but I hope you guys can use it because it really is something so useful, and again, a way that your volunteers can do something that your staff can't and actually enhance your services. And then another thing that I know is happening in Hillsborough County that we haven't tried yet is using volunteer animal control officers for just stray dog pickup. So they're not going to do enforcement, but they are just going to help us with that stray dog population. So we're looking into that, but I know Hillsborough just loves it. We have events that I'm going to talk about, clerical, but again, I would encourage you to really think about what your staff can and can't do and how your volunteers can enhance your services. This is Blancy. She's a volunteer groomer. I wish I had 30 of her. So this past year, our volunteers donated over 13,000 hours. Notice that I say hours. And that's because we have hundreds of volunteers. But that's not really what gives you your measure of success, because we have volunteers that might just volunteer at events 4 times a year, and that might be 10 hours. So we want to gauge our success by how many hours those volunteers actually engage, because that tells us how much we're improving and maybe if we need to do something differently. But they can exponentially get the word out for you, and so you need to equip them, just like your staff, and educate them. Another thing that was not happening was a formal rescue partnership. So it was just kind of this haphazard, I'm a rescue group, let me take an animal. But there was really no checks on any part of that program. Again, I want to work with everybody, but I don't work with anybody if they're operating illegally. It wouldn't make sense because I'm an enforcement department, so I have to make sure that everyone's operating legally. So we have a formal agreement, and we do check their 501c3 stat. They do have to be a 501c3. We check any properties. We check to see if they need a certificate of use. All of the documents that I've been talking about, our volunteer agreement, the rescue partnership agreement, is actually in your notebook for you. So all the forms that we use are in there, so you can look at them at your leisure. So we want to do the best we can to help our partners work efficiently and save the most animals. So we use Chameleon. There's probably other ways with other software that you can do the same thing. But what we do is we save, for example, if my technicians are checking an animal and we know that they're not going to go up for adoption for whatever reason, they put what's called a web note, and they say, I'm cute, I'm 20 pounds, I think I have this is one, like I'm 3 years old, and I might have a skin problem, my skin scrape was Demodex, I need to go to the vet. Whatever we know about that pet, we want to put it in that web note. And then our rescue partners get an automatic email twice a day. So before, what was happening is everybody meant well, but one rescue group might have 30 members. And one member would call the coordinator and say, oh, that's a cute Yorkie. What color are his eyes? And another person from the same group, oh, he's really cute. What color are his eyes? And then the next one, and so on and so on and so on. So you have an incredible amount of time that's wasted when you could do something like this that's the most efficient. And as our program grew, I think we started with about 25 groups, and I said, we need to do this as efficiently as possible. So 25 groups, all the groups are allowed 1 to 2 contacts with our rescue coordinators, and I am so glad. It was the best decision I ever made, because now we have 62 groups and several hundred volunteers as part of those groups, right? So you can see how it can very quickly become unmanageable to communicate. And it's not good for my staff, it's not good for the rescue partners, and it's worse for the animals who might get euthanized because we can't pick up the 30 messages that we're getting a day. So this has worked beautifully, and we're so happy with it. And then the contact's responsibility is to get with their groups and say, here, I got this Yorkie. Who can help with this Yorkie? So these are just some other postings we try to put in the information that's important to them to be able to place them appropriately. The other programs we have with our rescue partnerships is, remember, we have that 5-day stray hold. During that time, if a rescue partner says, oh, this one is injured, I'll take it on day 1 and give it the medical treatment that it needs. So we do that. It's called our medical foster care program. And the deal is that if we find that owner, and we say it's not a cruelty case or anything like that, you do have to bring the pet back. We also do a spay-neuter agreement with the rescue groups if we can't do the surgeries. We have a really good problem at Animal Services, but even good things can be problems, right? So our good part is we're saving so many animals, and our bad part is that we just can't spay and neuter them before release. We should be doing about 45 surgeries a day. With one surgeon, we're only able to do about 26. So there are those animals that are going out with spay-neuter release, and then what do? Then my staff has to call and make the surgery appointment if we can't make it right then. Then we have to follow up with them. Then they didn't come for their appointment. Then my animal control officer has to go to the house. And so look at all our resources that we've now expended. So we try to avoid that at all costs. People also can go to their own vet and have them spayed or neutered. But we follow it. We have a very, very high compliance rate. That's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about the time that we're wasting following up on those spay-neuter agreements. But in any event, these are our 2 rescue coordinators. In the first quarter if you compare the last 2 years' first quarter, they sent twice as many animals to rescue than the previous year. Twice as many, with 2 people, the same 2 people, no additional help. They do such a great job that they're getting awards from rescue groups. So we're really proud of them. And I think it speaks to this. Everybody has gifts. Some people are not gifted on the phone. Some people are not gifted to maybe raise donations. Everybody has a gift, and these 2 are gifted to work with rescue groups. And they have such a great relationship with them. So you always want to try again to figure out what the positive things, positive attributes that your employees have, and even volunteers, to get you where you need to go. So this year they broke their record. Over 4,000 animals went to rescue partners. And I think that people ask me often, well, how did we improve? How did we do this over the last 4 or 5 years? And the answer is that you never close your door. If somebody says, can I help? I'm shameless. Yes, I don't care what you do. I don't care what your business is. I don't care if you're rich or poor. I don't care how much time you do or don't have. You can't succeed without the public, without rescue partners, without the other organizations in your community. We're doing a disservice to the animals if we're not working with everybody. You need the public, right? You need the public to support you and then believe you that spay-neuter is the answer, so that when you have those programs, you know that they're going to trust you. You need to have their support. And every point of contact has to be possible. This one says, someone calling themselves a customer says they want something called service. And I don't know about you, but I've been called to every name in the book, and I get complaints sent to the mayor or the commissioners or directly to me. I deal with a lot of complaints, but I find when I actually sit down and analyze the complaints, you know what? It's from somebody in Minnesota in their underwear on the internet criticizing me for something that they heard. It's not about maybe a shelter problem or an animal. It's really this external internet inferno kind of thing. But regardless, you never know what's going to lead to a positive outcome. There was a woman several years ago that wrote a very nasty commentary in the Miami Herald about me, saying that I don't care about this and that and the other thing and all these crazy things. So I called her up and I said, I would love for you to come for a tour, and I would love for you to learn more about animal services. And that woman that sent me actually had a published nasty letter about me in the Miami Herald is now the president of my Animal Services Foundation. And probably every other month she's like, here, Sarah, $10,000 to buy cat cages. Here, Sarah, $10,000 for a spay-neuter. What if I didn't call her? What if I didn't say, please? I feel the same way as you do. Please come in and let me show you how you can help. And if you have a magic wand, better. Because I haven't found the magic wand yet. I need your help. And I need you to understand, and this is what the public wants you to understand, or wants to know from you as a shelter. Two things. You care, and is your goal to save animals. And I can tell you that before, that wasn't the case before 2004. When animals were left in the shelter and somebody had a hold on them for adoption, and they tested positive for an intestinal parasite with no clinical signs, they were euthanized without a phone call to the adopter, right? Well, of course, that's going to cause a lot of public scrutiny and deserved public scrutiny. So they want to know that you care. And the minute you reach out to them, I'm not going to say I have all the answers. I probably have a 5% failure rate with turning people around. But again, those people they live in, wherever, outer space, I think. But they're not people that really understand our shelter. They're just kind of reacting by rumors. So you know what? You want to be honest. You first want to make sure you're clean, right? Don't give them a reason to complain. And if somebody made a mistake, be honest about it. I was director for 3 weeks. And a 12-year-old golden retriever had been in the shelter. There was a typed note in Chameleon that said the owner will pick up. And a supervisor authorized the euthanasia. And the dog was euthanized. So here I am. The media's calling. And I could have said, there's just no way I'm talking to anybody about this. I could have said, I'm not available. But instead, I went in front of every camera, and there were many, and I said, this is a horrible, tragic mistake, and this was human error. And they said, what are you going to do to change it? I'm like, this was human error, and many precautions will be taken so that doesn't happen again. But I cannot tell you how much respect that brought to animal services. People were shocked. People still say to me, I can't believe, like you admitted, we're county. Nobody ever does anything wrong in the county, right? But I was honest about it, and it was very difficult to say on camera that, this is what happened. But this brought a lot of clout to animal services. So be honest. Never, ever say no comment to the media. Because guess what? If you don't tell them the truth and tell them how you're going to fix the problem, they're just going to make it up. Or they're going to get a statement from one of your critics. And your public perception is going to just plummet, and you're going to lose that public support that you desperately need, that you're desperately dependent on. You can never take it personally. I know in my position, and those of you in management, I mean, the only reason I'm a target is because I am the director of Miami-Dade Animal Services. These are people criticizing. They don't know me, so it's not, I mean, I don't know them, so there's no reason to take it personally. And when you get defensive, it makes it worse. It makes it impossible for you to really turn that person around. But this is what I tell the staff all the time. This is one of our dogs, not giving them a reason to complain is so much easier than dealing with complaints. So thinking about ways always to set yourself up for success every minute of every day. And if you're going to change, you've got to change things, then change things. And you know what? You're going to make a change, and it's not going to get better, so you change again. Your ideas are not always going to be perfect, and they're not always going to be productive, but you have the ability to be creative. So our veterinarians, we have 3 full-time veterinarians. We're open 7 days a week, and our rabies and microchip clinic is 7 days. So we have a veterinarian scheduled in there, and they're also treating sick and injured shelter pets. And then we do spay-neuter 7 days a week for the in-house shelter animals. And then we have a day for the cat spays and neuters for the public, and we have a day for the dog spays and neuters for the public. But again, their time is just so valuable, right? Because I've often said this to my staff when I used to do surgery. Look, I can update the record in Chameleon. I can knock out the animal. I can scrub them. But I can only do surgery. So you need to reserve me for surgery, right? And then we need to figure out what staff or volunteers are going to fill the other roles. We also have, these are the other services, owner-requested euthanasia. And so now we just finished our fiscal year. These numbers have actually stayed the same in terms of percentages. Our fiscal year just ended September 30th. But our stray ratio has stayed the same, 80% strays, 20% owner surrenders. In the winter, our intake is about 2,000 animals a month. In the summer, it's about 4,000 animals a month. June got up to, I think, 4,200. So the flow, as Dr. Hurley and everybody else has been talking about, is so incredibly important to save as many as possible and keeping them as healthy as possible. The veterinary technicians are the ones that are doing those physical exams when they come in to make sure that they don't have any major medical or behavioral problems. And in the winter, I call the adoption areas that prime real estate, right? But in the winter, when we have 2,000 animals a month, I don't care if that dog is doing the stray hold in adoptions and you just write, I have a 5 out of 6 heart murmur, but my lungs are good now, or whatever the case may be. If they have a problem, that's okay, as long as people are aware and it's on the cage card. Now in the summer, I can't do that because that space is so competitive. I think that if Drs. Levy, Crawford, Hurley, and myself sat down and tried to design the worst shelter, I don't think we could do worse than Miami-Dade Animal Services. I say that with great pain because we've been trying to get a new building for many years, and hopefully it's going to happen soon. But, everything that you've heard over the last 2 days is not part of this building. We have no air conditioning, thus no air exchange in any of the animal areas. It was built in the 1960s by Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters, which is why I think there's really bad karma in the building. Somebody said he might be buried under your desk, and I said, well, he's going to stay there forever because nothing is going from this building to the new building. Much of it's not built to code, so even if I wanted to fix something, it would be at a huge expense. Just the building has been neglected for so many years. So this part, it was designed and built as an animal hospital in 1968, but just this part. And in the early 70s, the county purchased the building, and in the mid-80s, they added this. So the yellow represents the restricted areas. We do have those areas before the animals are checked for adoption where they stay until they can move to adoptions, or they may stay in those restricted areas. But because, we're on Chameleon and our rescue partners get ID numbers, we will adopt from anywhere in the shelter. They just do have to sign a medical release. Again, that form is in your notebook, because we don't want somebody to miss a chance at adoptions. But you do have to be escorted here, and we only take you back there if you have an ID number or you are looking for your lost pet. But this part of the building was designed and built in the 80s, God knows by who, because instead, there are guillotine doors here. These are representing the runs. But the drains in the middle of the runs are horizontal. And I'm no plumber. But when you, hose stuff, it kind of stays. So the reason I think I win for the worst shelter is we have to have a sewage company come in and blow out these drains once a month, and the feces lands here on the cars. Don't I win? Do I win? Does anybody have anything worse? I hope not. I hope I'm the worst shelter, honestly, because I walk around and say, I hope nobody else has it worse than this. But in any event, so adoptions is here, and we opened up this whole section for the large dogs, and there's a ward here called C ward, and that's for anything but respiratory. So this section is the respiratory section. The guillotine doors are closed, right, because of the cough room. We don't want them to hit the dogs here in this section. So here's our shelter. This is all the way on the west. I have a fan right here that blows west. Cornell education. That's why I went to Cornell, to figure that out, right? That's the best we could do. But, we start treating them with antibiotics. We do the best we can with what we have. The drains in the ground are corroded and the tree roots are growing through them. This is part of what I was saying. The end runs are the dog adoptions. Now, this is all corroded. This is connected to this, that's connected to that, to that, to that, to that. I can't remove that. If I remove that, I have to rip out the section where there's 80, 90, 100 dogs. And I have no place else to put them. So we're just using a lot of duct tape and super glue to get us to the new building. But our goal is always to make the environment as welcoming and as healthy as possible for people and their pets. And I realized as Dr. Hurley was talking that I neglected to put some of the good pictures in here, like our cat condos and things. So I'll just tell you about one room that I had a girl. She was 15 years old at the time and a Girl Scout, and she said, I need to give a gift that keeps on giving. And being the shameless advocate for animals, I'll even utilize child labor, I said, we got a project for you. And we had this food room with holes in the walls, and the rats would come in and have some food, and then they'd leave. And I said, I think this would be a great cat adoption room because it's isolated. We can put an air conditioner in there. She came in and painted the walls, and she painted clouds, and her father and her built benches, and they did the floors over. And I purchased those cat condos with the shelves and the little litter cubbies with trust fund money. So we did a whole cat adoption room for free, essentially. And it's still our pride and joy. We love it. And everybody says, what did the cats do to get in this room? It was really just luck. And again, all the things that we do are free. So I know you guys, there's some people from up north, and I know you don't understand this. But when you live in Miami and it goes below 70, you have to wear a sweater. And the dogs, I know it sounds funny, but and I always thought I was crazy, but the dogs get cold. At 65, they're shaking. So we got to 45 degrees in Miami this year. you have to understand, like, this is my winter wear. Like, we're not equipped, but I had been collecting sweaters with our trust fund money or asking for donations. So this is like everybody dressed up for the cold. These are volunteers just painting, just making it look a little bit more presentable. I remember saying to my boss when I first started, I'm like, I'm standing in the middle of the dump with like a little spritz, like, woo, big difference. But you know what? You just do the best you can. Beds, we purchased with trust fund money. Toys with trust fund money on our wish list. Please give us disinfectable toys that we can disinfect. One problem that I would love for you guys to answer is, I realize that it's natural for dogs to pee on their bed and mark their territory, but it drives me insane. And so I made, in my very expensive Kuranda beds, I made a little hole so the pee would go down. But they still stink, and this drives me insane. And I know there's some behaviors that are like, oh, that's what they're supposed to do. I'm like, I realize that, but I need them to stop because I don't have enough bathers to like bathe them after that, and they smell like urine. But this is a very deep cold with a blanket and a sweater. And then I wish somebody else donated this, but we were just, making sure that every single animal had warmth. So I donated my personal sweatshirt. And my supervisor took my one sweatshirt, and she made it into 3 sweatshirts. So I wish that I had a donor that did this so I could like make a big deal about them, but again, you have the resources in your community, you have money, you have ideas, you have people that want to help. It's a sweatshirt. They don't even have to go to the store. They could just take it out of their closet. But if we go on the news and say, we need sweaters, we need shoe boxes, we're like inundated. And if you're in the cold or you need sweaters, my advice is to get fleece because they dry much quicker than the wool sweaters. So in any event, like I said, the techs are checking the dogs and puppies. They're doing the physical exam. If there's a gray area, they're not sure, they go in a vet checklist, the vet checks them. They might start treatment in the shelter or just make sure they get treatment when they leave. They're all vaccinated on intake, and they get frontline. We're only right now deworming and doing the fecals on the puppies because of their high adoption rate. And again, like I told you, they could be adopted or go to rescue from our restricted area. And then when the dogs are old enough, we test them for rabies, or if they are, when they get adopted, we do the rabies and the heartworm at that time because the heartworm is quite expensive. And unfortunately, we know that 57% of those adult dogs are going to be euthanized. So we want to make sure we're using our resources as wisely as possible. So you would just need to decide that for yourselves. And then we charge $65 for adult dogs and $75 for the puppies. Again, same things. The cats and kittens get kind of the same things, but we do the leukemia and FIV when they get adopted. Because it's not such a huge percent, we're okay doing it then. And we charge $35 for 2 cats, and we just started a 2-for-1 this year. And we have seen adoptions go up a little bit, but I heard somebody else say cat adoptions are your biggest challenge. By far, it's our most heartbreaking challenge. And one of the things we're looking at with the ASPCA, and they've done research on, is not charging for cats. And everybody's going to say this, oh my gosh, they're going to take the cat and not care. It's not going to be as valuable, and all those kinds of excuses. But in fact, they're showing that it really doesn't make a difference. So we're looking at that. We need to go back and change our ordinance to make that a reality. Anytime we educate the public, we call it an outreach event, and we make up all kinds of things. It was when I first started, it was the summer, and I love the holidays, so I said we really need to capitalize on the holidays. And now that I think back, it was kind of insane because I had like 4 bomb threats that year. I had a lot of kind of death threat related things going on. And I had these detectives that I was friends with, so I said, hey, can you guys just come to our event in case they call in a bomb threat? Like, so unreasonable, right, to like say that to somebody. But in any event, we did. We had our first event in December of 2005. We made a big deal. We got people to donate desserts. We had a live remote. We decorated the shelter for the holidays. and we adopted 30 animals at our event, and we were so excited. I mean, you just never saw staff like out of their minds excited. We have 4 adoption events a year, and we have different themes. Our Valentine's is Open Your Heart, Open Your Home. Our summer one we changed. We just had a Mexican fiesta, but our last Valentine's event, we adopted 122 in one event. So we went from 30 to 122. And if it wasn't working, we would just change and do something else, but we wanted to just keep, and people say, you should do this every weekend. I'm like, no, that's not the point. You need to make it special. And it's not about, even though, of course, we love having the adoption numbers go up, it's not about that day. It's about all the free stuff we get. It's about the free marketing we get before, during, and after the event. It's about the person who saw the event flyer and couldn't make it but came the next week. It's all about that message and getting the word out and every point of contact being positive. So we do Pets of the Week, as I know a lot of you do. We have a lot of clothes for dogs, and we make up stories, and everybody loves it. This was our volunteer vet day. That was our first one. I think we did about almost 150 or 60 cats, if I remember correctly, that day. And like I mentioned, Animal Planet had filmed several years before I started, and last year had asked us if we wanted to do another show. So we just finished filming with them last year, and we have 10 episodes now on Animal Planet. And the reason I like the show is I think it speaks for all of us in the animal control industry, and I think it really shows the compassionate side of our staff and your staff. And there's such great stories in there, and my investigator crying because she had to leave a dog at an abandoned property because she couldn't enter, and she left food and water. She was going to come back the next day, and she said, I'm going to be up all night, worried about this dog. And the next day they went back, and the camera was on her, and you could see the dog in the back, and she was talking, and you saw the dog squeeze through the gate and walk out to the street. And she goes, oh, stray dog. And she took the dog. And I said, Yambrick, if it wasn't on film, I would not have believed you. I saw it with my own eyes that that's what happened. And the dog went on to get adopted and become fat and happy. But social media, I'm hoping you're all doing these types of things and taking advantage of the internet in a positive way. In 2006, we had about 100,000 website visits. We hit 1 million this year. We couldn't do that alone, right? We have links to everybody that we can have links to. Pets 911, Pedigree, Adopt a Pet. There's many more that I didn't list. Facebook. So we want to take advantage of those things. I'm almost finished. Just got a couple more slides. So our adoptions, again, have increased. We now have a huge rescue partnership, and we have more community support than ever before. So that's why I know the steps that we took have worked. But I can't tell you, we did this, we did one thing. It's about everything. It's about every point of contact and utilizing every bit of resources that you can. These are just some of our adopters. And as Joan said, we were recently named the 10th ASPCA Partner Community, so I want to thank them for sponsoring this lecture. And we are just so excited and honored to have been chosen in Miami. And one of the reasons was the extent to which we collaborate with other organizations. So we're looking forward to the help of the ASPCA to take us above and beyond what we could do on our own. So we're super excited for that. The other deficit, another challenge we have in municipal shelters is that we have a very, very small pool of grant opportunities because those are really reserved for 501c3 organizations. So I did create the Animal Services Foundation that is a 501c3, and the sole goal is to fund spay-neuter programs, high-volume, high-quality spay-neuter programs, and I've brainwashed the whole board to, not going off on tangents and doing this, that, and the other thing. If you focus on targeted donor-subsidized spay-neuter programs, all you have to do is fund them. You don't have to convince people. We can fill those slots, and that's what's going to get you to where you need to go. We know, we've seen so many great shelters in our country who have these incredibly aggressive spay-neuter programs, decreasing shelter intake by over 50-60%. So we know it works. And cross your fingers for us that next week I'll find out the good news and our new budget will be approved. It's a little higher than what we had anticipated. Aren't they all? So we're really excited about that. But this is, I should have put this on one side, but there's the cats and there's the dogs so nobody complains. So thank you so much, and I'll take any questions if you want to go to the microphone. Thank you.